This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. With agriculture broadcasters Orion Samuelson and Max Armstrong. And featuring agriculture meteorologist Greg Soye. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Pioneer. Proud to work with farmers in the most complex and rewarding industry on earth.
Dryness remains a concern across much of the country for growers. Is there any relief in sight? Hello, folks. Welcome to This Week in Agribusiness. Weather is always a hot topic of conversation in farm country, and especially this year, it seems though we've got some dryness that continues to expand. Well, to help us get a feel for what to expect, we are joined by our meteorological expert, Mr. Greg Soye. Greg, what is happening? What are you seeing out there across the country?
Well, it's an expansion of this exceptional drought pattern across many areas of the plains, of course, ongoing across the west, including the southwestern California. We're keeping an eye on this part of the country, parts of the Corn Belt, and down, would you believe, in through Dixie. Would he expected a La Nina setup? Well, we see some improvement forecast for the Pacific Northwest with time, the northern Corn Belt, the northeast of New England. But look at the persistence and or development across many areas of the plains and ongoing across the southwest. Relief in sight. We'll answer that coming up.
All right, well, stay tuned. Thank you, Greg. We'll look forward to that update in a little bit. But just like weather is always changing, politics is always changing. Max reached out to Ethan Lane in D.C. to see how it could impact the beef industry.
Mike, with all of the changes in Washington, we want to get a perspective from one of the frontline workers there for American agriculture. Vice President of Governmental Affairs for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Ethan Lane, joining us. First, Ethan, we understand there's a new chairman of the House Agriculture Committee, certainly after the defeat of Colin Peterson. He'll be missed, won't he?
You know, Colin Peterson will be missed. We've worked really well with him. I've certainly enjoyed his time as chairman. But David Scott is a fantastic choice to follow him up as the chairman of the House Ag Committee. We have worked well with Congressman Scott for years here on Capitol Hill. He understands our issues. He's been a champion for agriculture. We really can't imagine a better choice to fill that seat, and that's going to be a great working relationship for us moving forward.
What do we know about David Scott? His district is not very rural, is it?
It's not, but he's a guy who's really gotten into the weeds on farming and ranching issues and that interconnection between, you know, the different sides of the ag equation. You know, the Farm Bill and the pieces that we see in play there really do bring in both sides, right? That's what it takes to get a farm bill done in Washington. The nutrition piece and the SNAP benefit piece and that rural support piece have to go hand in hand. It's one of the great collaborative pieces of legislation that we do in Washington, D.C. And I think David Scott is a great example of understanding both sides of those equations. Too often we get folks that know one side really well or the other side really well. And we're excited to have a chairman who really understands the yin and the yang of that.
Some of us recall when it was really a bipartisan work of art, the Farm Bill. That's a struggle anymore, is it not? And how do you think the next one's going to turn out? I know we've got some time here, but it'll be here before we know it.
You know, it is a struggle, but it is still one of, I think, the great shining examples of bipartisanship in Washington. You know, it might be a sliding scale, but it is still one of the great examples of bipartisanship. And yeah, it's starting to be time to have a conversation about the next Farm Bill. But, you know, we're still a couple years off, and there's a whole Congress to get through first where we have a lot of work we want to get done. You know, we've had a lot of issues going on in the cattle industry, cattle market issues, capacity issues. We can't wait for another Farm Bill to solve those. We need to get some work done now so that when we get to that Farm Bill point, we can talk about where we go moving forward rather than trying to solve issues that we've already been dealing with over the last couple of years.
Since you mentioned cattle market issues, where will the NCBA go with this, and what kind of congressional support do you find?
Well, this is an issue that obviously has been front and center for legislators over the last year, starting with Holcomb, going through the COVID crisis. You know, we've seen the metrics now from the report out of USDA. We have a group that's been focused on the price discovery piece of that issue, you know, looking at making sure we have enough negotiated trade in the marketplace to really determine price and ensure that our producers are getting a fair price for their cattle. But we're also working with Capitol Hill to make sure that we're providing a lot of resources to expand hook space, to expand processing capacity, to make sure that we have plants growing where they need to grow to make sure that they can get our product moved to market quickly and really make sure there's enough of it available. We don't want to get into another situation where we have a backlog of cattle like we saw earlier this year.
Finally, how important is it that your members, your cattlemen and women out there, stay engaged in this process with all of the changes taking place in Washington? More important than ever?
There is no more important piece of this equation than our producers staying engaged. The reason Congress has focused as much on cattle markets this year is because our producers have voiced their opinions to their elected members of Congress. And I say this all the time, and I'm going to keep saying it. Call them, write them, email them, pull them aside when they're doing a function in the district. They need to hear how important this is. We're too good at doing our jobs and not communicating what we need in our industry. And we need to get better about being really vocal about what this industry needs to not just hang on, but thrive moving into the next 50 years.
Ethan, thanks for your time.
Great to be with you.
Ethan Lane, Vice President of Governmental Affairs, Mike, with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association.
Well, thanks, Max and Ethan. There certainly has been a lot of pushback from producers on the beef side when they're looking at ways to market. Well, speaking of marketing, we're going to turn to Dale Dirkels from Grain Cycles. And Dale, since we were just talking about the beef market, let's start there. What are you seeing when it comes to cattle futures?
Well, I think, when you look at the cattle market at this point, there's one and a very short-term problem we have, and it appears that retailers themselves have a lot of meat already bought to go into the counter in here. And, there's a little bit of a surplus there in the very short term. We could say the same about pork. And I think that's going to be a bit of a depressant as far as the wholesale sector is concerned. But right now where we're trading 110, we might tend to stay there through winter, but long term, you have to look at the impact of the vaccine and coronavirus.
Yeah, that is going to be the driving factor. We've already heard concerns that plants might be shutting down due to absenteeism again. That's going to be something that the market will definitely price into effect.
Yeah, it really is, and I think that is a problem, and maybe one of the reasons that retailers and the wholesale pipeline's kind of full. You look at some of the weights. Cattle are a little heavy, but not unseasonably so. And hogs, we've got some huge weights out there when you look at those. And I think people on the other end have kind of preemptively tried to position, if we get a shutdown, in any kind of slaughter capacity or slowdown, it's going to have ramifications back into the cash market for hogs and cattle both.
Absolutely. It could be a repeat, potentially, of what we saw this spring. Folks should be prepared for that. Speaking of pork, we saw export sales this past week look pretty strong for pork, up considerably from a week ago. When you look at the buyers of pork, both Mexico and China were up there. Where do you see this market going on the pork side?
Well, the pork export sector itself, has been pretty robust in here going back into the summer months themselves after we came out of the issues with the pandemic last spring. And so I think that's going to continue to be relatively strong, and in neither place do we have what I'm calling, it doesn't seem like a huge surplus to deal with or huge stocks to deal with. So I think they're going to be a steady buyer in the mix now. And they may be proactively being a little bit cautious and wanting to have supplies purchased in line on route, in case we do have another slaughter curtailment here in the U.S. itself. But, China, the talk is we're seeing a rebuilding in the hog herd right now. But the thing we have to deal with here at this point is the pork output from that's still going to be a number of months away. So it's not going to fill the pipeline for them anytime soon. And so with their economy doing well, I think China in particular is going to continue to be a steady buyer even as we move into early 2021.
All right, Dale, before we take a break, I want to ask you a question that I've heard from a lot of growers this past week. The grain market rally, did it come to an end this last week?
I think there's a chance that it came to an end, but, I don't know that we're going to have any huge break or decline. We could talk about that ad infinitum, but I think for now the market's taken a pause.
All right, you think it's going to take a breather, wait to see what news comes, and then make a decision?
Well, actually, when you look at both corn and beans and even to a lesser degree wheat, but when you look at corn and beans in particular, any kind of a bull market you have, at some point you got to start asking yourself, what more ammunition is there to throw at the market to keep this market moving upward? And I think that's the issue we're running into now. We've ran out of bullish ammunition, and actually we've started to see just some little bearish things start to creep up. And I think that's going to work against it.
All right, well, we'll dig into the details of that here in just a bit, so don't go anywhere. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by the Soybean Checkoff. Tips, videos, how-tos, and more. If it has to do with ag tech, you'll find it in the Tech Tool Shed, your unbiased one-stop resource. Well, we're talking markets with Dale Dirkholz from Grain Cycles. Dale, you talked about how this grain rally might have come to an end this past week. Let's talk corn first and foremost. The corn market, of course, has been battered early this past week. Where do you see it going from here?
Well, let's come back a little bit at this point here as we're talking today. But you know, the one thing that I'd mentioned there before we broke, we've kind of run out of ammunition in the market at this point in time to continue to fuel the bull for now. You know, the corn market to me has always been one that's been kind of following the bean market. And I think to a degree, it's still following the bean market, or, you know, it's been getting a little bit of support from wheat, which has evaporated. But the corn market, the real story is going to be getting out into late winter, spring, and what might we see as far as that second crop corn out in Brazil. And that's going to have huge ramifications on exports. Right now, corn exports themselves, just a wee bit soft maybe, but you know, they've always been slated, if they're going to be good, to be back end loaded. And I think that's what the USDA has been counting on. But we aren't going to know any of that until we get out into March or maybe April, something like that.
So how should growers handle this step back in the markets? Obviously, we've had a phenomenal rally. Hopefully, folks have been rewarding that rally with sales. But now that we're on this precipice here where things could change, how should growers handle it?
You know, the one thing that you look at with the corn market at this particular juncture, where you've taken all the carry out or most of the carry out, and you've got basis levels here in the spot that are still pretty robust and strong. You know, I think it's still a market, you know, from a cash standpoint, if your basis levels are good, you know, to continue to sell into. And if you really want to have ownership, you know, put together some kind of a strategy to own it on paper itself, you know, and you get out from under storage, you get out from under worrying about quality if you get it already priced and pushed into the market itself, but you still have that ownership if something does come in South America to give the market the next lift. You know, I'm not certain it's going to happen, but I'd rather have my management over in paper market right now than in the cash market.
That makes a lot of sense, particularly on the corn side. On the soybean side, Dale, we again saw a big step back at the early part of this week once it was forecast that more rains were going to fall in South America. Where do you see soybeans going from here? Exports have still been very strong. Is that going to be the driver going forward?
You know, the export, people have talked about sales, but, you know, in both corn and beans, you know, at this point in time, we really need to keep an eye on what's going on in the shipment sector. In beans, I've been looking at 2016, 2017 as kind of a guideline for the pattern. Corn, actually, I've been looking at 2015, 2016, I think it is, you know, for the driver of the pattern. But in the beans, you know, that pattern of 2016, 2017, we're basically following lockstep at this point. And so far, you'd have to say we're not going to see exports necessarily any stronger than what the USDA's already got built into their balance table. So even though sales are strong, just like we've seen the last couple of weeks, sales have just kind of flattened out, and you know, we're not really selling much at all. I think we've sold the total the last 2 weeks in beans somewhere around 40 million bushel or something like that. So it's really kind of died on the vine here temporarily. And I think that's high prices. I think it's also South America.
That makes a lot of sense. Dale, real quick, what's your price target for soybeans this spring?
That's a hard one. If we get good rains in South America, we may have seen the high in beans already at a $12 bill. I'm real concerned about that at this point. And, you know, I'd say quickly, people need to take a look at maybe starting some pricing of 2021 crops too, corn and beans both.
All right, Dale Dirkholz from Grain Cycles.
Chad Colby's Look at Agriculture Technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform, combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability.
Farm safety is always worth talking about, and this week, Chad Colby brings us a story that connects technology with farm safety.
So when we talk about the latest in technology, it's pretty easy to remember when we went from big phones like this to our handy little smartphones. But I think one thing we forget about is the safety involved with our smartphones today. Hi everyone, I'm Chad Colby, and on this week's tech segment, I've got a special guest, a farmer from Western Illinois. Andy Bartlow's with us today, and I wanted to talk to him simply because he had a nice little reminder of how some of this technology can really help you when you're in a little bit of a bind. Hi Andy, tell us a little bit about your story last week.
Thank you, Chad, for the opportunity. So approximately here 10 days ago, I was involved in a farm accident. Was in the process of unhooking from our 870 ripper, tillage equipment. We're basically wrapped up for the fall. Best position we've been in 3 years. Basically had everything but the drawbar pin unhooked from the tractor, and was having some problems getting the drawbar pin loose. And I guess in true farmer fashion, just grab a bigger hammer and get it done. Right. So I finally got the drawbar pin loose. When I did, the ripper moved about 2 feet. It knocked me to the ground, and I had the ripper on I had a 6x6 block underneath the jack stand. And when that ripper moved, it moved, knocked me over, and it moved from the 6x6 block to my right foot. I was then, it happened in a matter of seconds. I realized I was in major trouble. In the meantime, I realized I was in major pain. But where I was really lucky was my phone was on my hip, where it's usually at 99% of the time. But there's times I'm in the tractor and I just pull it out and it's sitting in the cup holder. I was able to call my dad and my cousin, because where I was at was about 8 miles from our home base. And those guys were able to come, help me, get my foot free, and get me to an emergency room.
Andy, thank you so much for sharing your story. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
Don't go anywhere, folks. Later on in the program, we will be taking a look at a new innovation in fertilizer, so stay with us. Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. One of the great things about agriculture in America in particular is the amount of tools we have available to manage our risk. One of the newest tools came open to producers on November 9th, 2020, and that was when the CME released their pork cutout contract. This is different from the lean hog contract because the lean hog contract is priced based on, it's a reflection, I should say, of the price of a hog in this country. The pork cutout contract is going to be different. It's not going to be based on a hog price. It's going to be based on the components of that hog that become pork at the end of the day, and that's the value that it's based on. Now, we had to figure out this contract, and to do that, we turned to our friend Dennis Smith from Archer Financial Services to get a better understanding. So Dennis, let's talk a little bit about this new pork cutout contract. It's been out now for almost a month. How has volume been so far? Has there been a lot of uptake of this new tool?
It started out slow, but that's normal. All contracts, when they're introduced, begin slowly. Volume is starting to pick up, and open interest is building, which is critical. You got to see that open interest. You got to see positions that go home at night. It's a slow, but I think it's fairly typical and probably pretty well received by the industry so far.
Well, now that's impressive. And Dennis, you work with producers around the country. Was the need for something like this pork cutout contract something they talked about frequently, or was this just kind of a left field thing that CME developed and then unveiled?
Now, this is actually something my clients were hollering for. A lot of our clients now are not paid on the negotiated price of cash hogs. They are paid by a formula tied to the hog carcass, the cutout value. And that's why this product has been developed to assist in the hedging of the producers who are not paid on a negotiated cash hog price, but tied to the carcass value itself.
So, Dennis, let's talk a little bit more specifically. Let's say I'm a producer and I'm raising hogs. How could I use this tool to manage risk more effectively?
Well, again, you want to be watching for a peak in price or a high price, or you might say a profitable price, something we haven't seen a lot of in the hog industry in the last couple of years. Anytime you see a price level that appears to be a profitable price level, this contract offers you the opportunity to go in and sell it and lock in a carcass price for your animals, and indeed, if it's a profitable level, obviously locking in a profitable price level. There's other opportunities on a spread relationships. We'll be watching this closely. For example, if the carcass gets undervalued relative to the hog contract, a guy might go in and sell the hog contract and buy the carcass. In other words, an inter-commodity spread. Just the opposite if the carcass looks expensive relative to the hog market.
Gotcha. So it's that intermarket spreading ability is really where you see this finding a home perhaps more broad-based than just producers.
I suspect, Mike, that's where the open interest build is initially going to develop from. Guys willing to buy one and sell the other, and then hold that position, take that position home overnight. There's a little bit of concern about the volatility on the noon quotes. Sometimes you'll see a belly primal quote sharply higher or sharply lower, and thus a cutout value sharply higher, sharply lower. I believe just this week alone, we saw a noon quote where the hog carcass was up over $4 versus the close the previous day. So that's a little bit of a concern, but it's a 5-day moving average, smoothed out moving average. So hopefully the industry can sort of deal with that noon quote volatility.
Yeah, and the fact that you mentioned bellies there makes me think that I've heard from folks that this could be similar to the pork belly contract in that it becomes, the worry was it would be primarily used for speculators to try and profit, but it sounds like this has legitimate home in the toolbox for hog producers.
Well, yeah, the pork belly contract, of course, in its heyday was widely traded by all sorts of participants. But then as the bellies became not so much used in the frozen market, that was a frozen pork belly market, then the end users really stopped trading the belly market, and then it became a real gunslinger type of a market. This hog carcass contract is completely different because the packer might have a reason to come in and trade the market, and the hog producers that are tied to a formula certainly have an incentive to come in and trade the market. Speculators can be involved any way they like, buying the market, selling the market, spreading the market, writing options, buying puts, selling calls. So it's a legitimate and well-needed contract by the industry.
Well, and that, I think, is a great place to wrap it. You feel that this is going to provide some value to the pork industry, and that's something that's exciting to see.
Yeah, most definitely.
Fantastic. Well, Dennis Smith from Archer Financial Services, thanks for taking the time to chat with us today. And of course, Dennis isn't the only person who will be providing access to this contract. Contact any broker in your area if you're curious about seeing how this thing could work for you. Now, don't go anywhere, folks. Stay with us because later in the program, we'll be taking a look at the new Vermeer self-propelled baler. It's worth sticking around for.
This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by ADM.
Hello, folks. Thanks for joining us here this week on This Week in Agribusiness. One of the major topics that's been discussed in agriculture over the past several years is sustainability. We continue to see major manufacturers looking to make moves to become more sustainable, and in fact, our own Willie Vogt had the chance to travel to Florida to see what the next step in fertilizer might look like.
The startup world in agriculture is crowded with a diverse range of new ideas still working their way to market, but some are ready. We recently returned from a trip to Florida to see a significant step for Annuvia Plant Nutrients, the opening of its first plant capable of producing its new kind of fertilizer at levels high enough to meet commercial demand. We caught up with company management to learn more about the product and the new facility. We start off with Amy Yoder. She's the CEO of Anuvia Plant Nutrients and has been working in agriculture for some time. Yet she took on the challenge of this startup, and she explains what drove that decision.
It is a big deal for a startup, especially when you think about 5 years ago when we started. It was literally a technology in a lab. So what we've grown to sometimes even makes me kind of sit back and think about where we actually started. So why I was interested in a startup is I spent over 20 years in the ag industry, primarily with crop protection, all over the country and the world. And when I was looking for the next challenge, I really wanted to do something that made an impact for a long term and kind of leave a legacy. And I had looked at a number of technologies that had to deal with sustainability, but I didn't really see anything at that time that I thought could actually benefit farmers all over. And that for me was very important.
The Anuvia facility is essentially bolted on to an existing fertilizer plant that was no longer in service. This allowed the startup the ability to put existing technology to work along with its new process. But what makes Anuvia's product different? Hugh McGillivray, Chief Commercial Officer for Anuvia, explains.
We're taking different organic substrates, things like food waste, manures, different source organics, breaking it down, and then we're binding it with inorganic nutrients, and we create a multi-nutrient bio-based product that really does three things for growers. It creates nutrient efficiency, so it translates into more bushels per unit of nutrition. You could look at it as more yield, and then it has a better environmental footprint, so we reduce the amount of nutrients that are lost into the environment through leaching and volatilization. And then we have a smaller carbon footprint because of the way we manufacture it and because of the use efficiency of that material.
McGillivray emphasizes that while it is a bio-based product, Anuvia fertilizer is not a biological product, nor is it organic. Yet it can use as a base a wide range of products that are either food waste or agricultural waste and end up with a consistent fertilizer that is 16% organic matter. I wanted to know more about the startup's approach and why Anuvia targeted corn, cotton, and canola rather than the higher value crops that are so often the target of startup companies. Amy Yoder tells us more.
If you really want to make an impact from a sustainability aspect, when I'm looking at 90 million acres of corn, that makes an impact, right? And that to me is what we were about, or what we've been driven and focused on ever since the very beginning.
A bio-based product that can help farmers boost sustainability without changing their current practices seems like an interesting idea to consider as agriculture looks at more ways to become sustainable. Reporting for This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Willie Vogt.
Thanks, Willie, for that story. It's incredible the amount of innovation that continues to come out of agriculture almost every single day.
Now, agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier brings us his farm weather forecast for the nation for the week ahead. It's presented by Pivot BioProven, the nitrogen-producing microbes that stay put, whether or not.
Well, it's always good to talk weather. Greg Solier is back with us. And Greg, at the top of the show, you mentioned that the Northwest might see some drought relief. Is that going to start this week?
Not coming all at once, not this week. We've seen it in the past few weeks. Basically, the Cascades on westward as a whole in this La Nina setup, the steering currents would be conducive to get with time the usual wet weather and snow weather related weather systems into the Pacific Northwest. Not this week. It's onshore. It's fast moving, and maybe an errant snow and rain shower into parts of the southern Canadian Rockies, northern Rockies as well. Mild air downstream relative to so-called December. And look at, that weather system is lickety-split moving on by. A little bit of a boundary, some colder air up through Big Sky Country, the Canadian Prairie, a couple of leftover snow showers and sprinkles, higher elevations. Maybe late in the week we get a rain shower or two to pop into western Washington State, quiet through northern California. And yes, cognizant of the expanding, ongoing dryness and drought-related issues, where we had another week last week of offshore flow, and we're going to do it again through Southern California. Not done with the fire situation. Probably will be a story that continues to kind of build with time this ongoing wintertime season. A little chill in the air. We certainly welcomed the moisture last week over parts of Kansas and Oklahoma. Not much going on. Another front zips right on by. A little of any organized precipitation. Clockwise flow around the high. More wind for Southern California. Delightful outdoor work and seasonal coolness with dry time continuing on over those drought areas of the central and southern plains.
Now, Greg, the last week has been fairly quiet in the Corn Belt. Is that going to continue?
It has, with the exception of the eastern complex. Of course, with the snow and rain of last week, we're back into this fast-moving northern branch dominated west to east upper airflow, a few sprinkles and snowflakes, and some shower activity eastern Great Lakes region. Seasonal high pressure and temperatures and weather across much of the northern and central plains. That high builds up towards the Sioux. Another fast-moving disturbance late in the week. Pretty comfortable from an outdoor work standpoint if you're trying to cross the T's and dot the I's with field work in mind across the Corn Belt, back into the Plain States areas too as the week wears on. Cool, dry weather coming off last week's snow. Yeah, a nuisance with travel and livestock operations through Kansas and Oklahoma, but you melted it down. You had about 1.5 inches water equivalent. A couple of showers south Texas, along the Gulf Coast area. Very quiet weather picture. Maybe another sprinkle moving in later in the week onto the southern plains, and an uneventful spell of weather from the southwest into the southeastern states for this week.
Now, Greg, I know if you go northeast from Ohio, you're basically under snow cover the entire time. Is some of that going to melt this next week?
Yeah, we should be in these thaw-free cycles already. So as we say in the livestock sector, watch your step under hoof kindly. Plenty of muddy fields. So it might be a little bit of a predicament trying to get the last of harvest and fall cleanup going here. It'll rain snow system through the northeast of New England, keeping an eye on the dryness and drought here into parts of central Illinois as well. 1 to 3 inches below average in their gauges over the past couple of months. And another fast-moving weather system for the upper Midwest, the core of the cold into the northeast of New England. Mild high pressure and a delightful go of it for so-called December across the rest of the Corn Belt. Early in the week, widespread showers and thunderstorms in these waterlogged areas of the southeastern states. We move into a cooler and drier weather picture for the end portion of the week with high pressure control and seasonal temperatures to boot.
Now, Greg Soye is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country. Presented by Pivot Bio Proven. Visit pivotbio.com to find a representative near you.
Well, let's talk precipitation. Greg, as you look out to this next week, what are you expecting to see fall from the sky and where?
Well, where we need it, we ain't going to get it. Unfortunately, that's many areas of the plains, back into the western states, maybe a spot of moisture into the Pacific Northwest. A couple of showers late in the week down through Oklahoma and Texas. Yeah, I know it was snow, but you got something last week across parts of Kansas and Nebraska and Oklahoma. Little or none expected there. Most of the action downwind of the Great Lakes region into parts of the northeast of New England, and primarily early in the week, some widespread showers and thunderstorms over the halves with another 1 or 2 in the gauge down there.
Now, how about the week after, starting December 14th? What are you seeing?
That west to east zonal La Nina setup. Once again, sinking air off the Rockies. You compress a gas, it warms, and here you go. Above average temperatures, pretty delightful with the last of outdoor work for this season trying to wind out in many areas of the Corn Belt. A bit below average here over the southeastern part of the country. Warmth back in the desert southwest, valleys of California. Temperatures about normal in the Pacific Northwest. Same with certainly early to mid-December moisture. That's good news, but look at the dryness and drought-ridden areas of the country. They remain high and dry, unfortunately. Back into the Corn Belt, the Plain States areas, maybe a little pickup on moisture, and it is still needed into the Northeast and New England.
Now, the next week in your forecast, rather, has both the winter solstice and Christmas. Are there going to be any travel difficulties?
Don't worry about Santa. I know he can come in with wheels down. He doesn't need the blade action all the time. But we do see something materializing. A little bit of a push of colder air, a little bit of a trough, still some warmth into the Ohio Valley and the southeastern part of the country. And so precip expanding northern California, northern Rockies, a little more normalized winter feel and precipitation pattern for the northern plains, and back into some snow for the northeast of New England. Still high and dry Ohio Valley, back into southern Texas.
Now, it's hard to believe, but the final week of your forecast actually takes us into 2021. Greg, what are we seeing to start the new year?
New year, new weather forecast, at least new pattern shift anticipated. Remember, we've been talking about the past few weeks this cold air wedged across the northern tier states. Here it is. Look at the warmth down here. Look at the buckling jet stream pattern here. Another one through the Ohio Valley. So it's time for winter storms, and why not? It's January, and we'll get them through again parts of the northern Rockies, northern plains, northern half of the Corn Belt into the northeast of New England. Mixed moisture across the Ohio Valley. Back into dry time. Remember, talked about expanding dryness and drought. Here it comes across the southeastern part of the country and ongoing over the southwestern U.S.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
And Max's Tractor Shed this weekend, a Farmall M in Illinois, appreciated by 4 generations of the same family, and not one of them paid for it. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by Store-Lock Tool Cabinets. Made in America quality, rock solid. Not just solid, rock solid. Check out what they have at storelock.com. Well, Charlie Hatch, a farmer in Illinois, bought a Farmall M brand new in 1940. And through the years, the mechanic at the international dealership, Mike Dingus, took such good care of it that when Charlie died, his daughter gave it to Mike. Subsequently, other generations of the Dingus family in Illinois have appreciated this Farmall M. In the photograph here, you see Don Dingus, my longtime friend, the fellow who started and has presided over the Sublet Farm Toy Show in Illinois. His son, Nick, who inherited that tractor from his granddad, Mike, and Nick's son, Jake, in the photograph. I like that black muffler. That really sets it off, of that Farmall M at Sublet, Illinois. Well, there are 3 states that Mark Stock is going to talk about this weekend. The report from Big Iron Auctions. Hey, Mark.
Well, Max, we've got an outstanding sale coming up here December the 9th and December the 16th for Del Clay Farm Equipment, Edgewood, Iowa. I'm here with Jay Funky, who has been owner-operator of this location for a great many number of years. He's turning the business over to his daughter. Check out this huge sale. Good quality, well-represented equipment selling on Del Clay Farm Equipment Auction December 9th and December 16th.
Also, Max, Stensland Land and Livestock Company out of Wolf Point, Montana is selling some really well cared for equipment. A 2015 Case IH Puma 185 mechanical front tractor with a loader, only has 1,335 hours. They've also got a 2019 New Holland Roll Belt 560 Specialty Crop 5x6 round baler that has less than 1,600 bales. Now, Aaron Williamson, custom application out of Sublet, Kansas. They've got some beautiful Kenworth W900L trucks. There's a 2015 and a 1995 day cab. Also selling a 2012 GMC 2500 Sierra 4x4 extended cab pickup with a Duramax diesel. They've got a Hustler zero-turn mower and a Yale 6,000-pound forklift. Folks, we've got over 1,670 items selling from 181 different sellers on our December 9th Big Iron online auction.
The FFA Chapter Tribute is sponsored by Nationwide, the #1 farm insurer in the country. To register your FFA chapter, go to nationwidesupportsffa.com. That's nationwidesupportsffa.com. Nationwide, we stand for you.
This week's FFA Chapter Salute continues the tradition of getting to know the National FFA officers. And today we are talking with Miriam Hoffman, who is the Eastern Region Vice President for the National FFA. Miriam, thanks for taking the time to chat with us this week.
Mike, thank you so much for the invitation. It's always a pleasure.
So let's talk a little bit about where you grew up. Where are you from and what did you do?
I'm from the very small town of Earlville in north central Illinois. I grew up on a diversified crop and livestock farm. One of my favorite experiences growing up was spending time with my family. We grow some organic row crops as well as raising dairy cattle and sheep and some goats, and we sell breeding stock across the country.
Wow, that is quite an operation. You guys are very well rounded down there in Earlville.
Yes, we do our best.
So tell us where you're at now. You're in school, in college, and what are you studying?
Yes, I'm a junior at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, studying agribusiness economics, and I haven't decided for sure on a minor, but I'm looking at environmental studies.
All right. So now this combination of things, your upbringing, your experience with FFA, and your time in college, what all has it given you to conquer things in the future?
It's given me so much. I always describe my time in the FFA, it didn't make me who I am, but it gave me a place to become who I was meant to be. And that started growing up on the farm and seeing my dad's legacy, having been involved in the FFA, and then getting involved in it myself. My older sister really encouraged me to join, and it really did. It gave me a space where I could get out of my comfort zone. I had people surrounding me that constantly challenged me to do more, to become more, and to be more. And that's fundamentally why I am where I'm at today, is because of all the people who poured into me.
That is incredible. Well, congratulations on becoming the Eastern Region Vice President, Miriam, and we wish you the best of luck as you graduate here in the next few years.
Now, Samuelson Says. Insight and commentary from Orion Samuelson.
Guess what? I have found a new least favorite word to add to the list I provided for you earlier this year. Words that have been developed because of the COVID-19 situation. And in agriculture, postponement, cancellations of county and state fairs, outdoor farm shows, and now we're coming into the annual meeting time for a lot of organizations and companies serving agriculture. And in their press releases, I'm getting this new line, quote, "For the first time in our history, we weren't able to sit down with our friends and neighbors at annual meetings to talk about policy and to formulate policy." And that got to me to thinking about the many other events that were postponed or canceled this year, like the county fairs and state fairs, because so many people depend on those events for a living to help out their income situation for the year. And they haven't had that this year, and they are not going to have it now that the fair season has come to an end. So give some thought to those people and their needs. Farmers help a lot of people, but here's a situation to help a lot of events that are important to farmers and ranchers. So let's think about those families that didn't have an income this year because they couldn't cook hot dogs or flapjacks or whatever at county and state fairs. Think about them because they're facing a tough winter too, besides COVID-19. My thoughts on Samuelson Says.
Don't go away, folks. Coming up next, we'll have a look at the Vermeer ZR5 1200 self-propelled baler. Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Now, if you are a person who puts up hay for your operation, you probably spend a lot of hours in that cab and you might be looking for an upgrade. Well, we've got one for you. Check out the Vermeer self-propelled baler that was on display at the Farm Progress Virtual Experience.
The Vermeer ZR5 1200 self-propelled baler. The ZR5 1200 self-propelled baler makes quick work of a field while offering an unprecedented level of comfort and maneuverability. Unlike tractor baler combinations, this zero-turn machine is built tough and specifically designed for one job, baling hay and other forages. Unprecedented ride quality is achieved through patent-pending suspension technology. Operators experience a smoother, more comfortable ride with the cab uniquely positioned over the suspension. The ZR5 1200 cab was built with wide visibility in mind with a camera to see both the baler pickup and rear view. Automating parts of the baling process, the ZR5 1200 aims to reduce the number of steps to make a bale. When in automatic mode, the ZR5 1200 control system, paired with a hydraulic drive system, can make real-time adjustments based on field and crop conditions, and can even open and close the tailgate automatically. The ZR5 1200's innovative design, coupled with its 200 horsepower engine, helps achieve maximum benefits in hay operations. This includes rallying at speeds of up to 12 miles per hour in the field and 30+ miles per hour when in transport mode. The bale chamber can be removed for maintenance in a matter of minutes. For convenient access to the bale chamber for routine maintenance. Get ready to let the ZR5 1200 change the way you put up hay.
Well, thank you, Max. And folks, if you want to watch that video again or see any one of the 100 products that were on display at this year's Farm Progress Show virtual experience, just go to farmprogressshow.com and you can watch them all as many times as you want. With that, we want to thank you for taking the time to join us, and we'll see you next week.
Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness has been brought to you by Pioneer and ADM. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.